sometimes we pretend to be someone that we're not so that we can like fake it and fit in. But that's not true belonging. That's the opposite, really. So one way we can move towards true belonging is through authenticity. Another way is through intimacy. A lot of my work right now comes through as like sex and relationship coaching. The first goal is not about giving good oral sex. The main purpose of BlowJoy is to help women to enjoy it. And it makes us feel more connected to the people that we're doing it with and more connected to ourselves because we're tuning into what feels good for us in this process. And so part of my work here is to take us from this like vicious cycle of moving further and further away from belonging and to like stop and catch ourselves and move towards what feels good, move towards what lights us up, move towards connection that is authentic and embodied and like real and feels good in our systems.
Welcome to this new episode, and today I am here with Katie Mae. How are you, Katie?
I'm good, thank you. Happy to be here.
Very nice. So Katie is an intimate belonging priestess. So today we're going to talk about belonging. First of all, I'd like to ask you, what is your story in life?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, and I was born and raised into a normal family in a normal community. I was a good Catholic growing up, which feels funny now.
Me too.
And then I became a school teacher, and I started traveling all over the world, and I started seeing that there were so many ways to live in this world, and so many different like cultures, and so many different ways of being, that really stretched my idea of like what is normal and what is good and what is bad. And and then I also have been on a journey of moving towards true belonging myself, of trying to find places and people where I feel like, yeah, I belong here. And it's been quite a journey that took me to, 40 countries over a couple of decades, always kind of trying to move towards true belonging. And finding little pieces and ways to like, oh yeah, this feels good here, I belong here. Would then sometimes only lasts, a few minutes or whatever, and then it's time for another move to true belonging. So quite a journey.
Okay, so I know you from a long time because you were here before the pandemic for quite a while, I remember.
Yeah.
So you were belonging to the island for a while,
yes.
And then you left, and then you came back like maybe a month ago, and you were very popular on the island because of this very interesting workshop that you run called BlowJoy.
Yes.
Okay, maybe we can talk about it a little later, but first of all, let's go back to, what prompted you to travel for 2 decades and discover and search?
I think initially it was just like a desire for adventure, a desire to like see what was out there, and to experience new people, new cultures, new foods. And I've always been a bit of a seeker, like always searching for God, if you will, and for adventure.
It's not so easy sometimes if you are like prone towards, a lifestyle which is a little bit more nomadic, or you want to go and seek and learn and see, because, mainstream society kind of wants you settled, right?
Yeah.
Very much. So they want you in a job, with a mortgage, maybe a husband or something like that.
Yeah.
How did you cope with these expectations?
I left. And it helped that I was a school teacher. So there were opportunities for me to teach all over the world. And I went through a few phases where sometimes I wish I could be more normal. Sometimes I wish I could just, you know, have a home and a husband and maybe a couple of kids and just stay somewhere. But there was something in me that just couldn't quite do that. I think I've always been, I used to say I had commitment issues. And now I know that I'm actually quite good at commitment. I only commit to things that I plan to really follow through on. And growing up, I didn't even know until my mid-20s that monogamy was something that I had a hard time really committing to, because I love lots of people and I want to engage with lots of people. And there was something about the expectations of monogamy that didn't feel good for my soul. Like, I didn't feel free. And so instead of choosing a partner and sitting down in a house, I traveled all over and I met lots of really amazing people. And I think I was always kind of searching for a way to be at peace with myself, searching for a way to integrate, like, you know, the parts of me that want to be normal with the parts of me that want to be free. And so I was always kind of searching for that, and I've gone through many waves of wishing I could be more normal, and then loving myself just for who I am, and round the spiral, you know.
Yes, because there is always a trade-off. I mean, between your true self, or what you want to manifest as, you know, your desires, predispositions, and wishes, and society on the other side. So I think finding the right balance, this kind of compromise between, you know, sort of like giving back to society, being part of society's structure, you know, not going against society, but at the same time retaining your true self is very challenging.
Yeah.
And it's if you can do it well, it's one of the most amazing things you can do in life, I think. Because that's a challenge that everybody has to a certain extent. And some people, like, you know, they just belong to society a lot more, as in they follow the rules 100 or 99%.
Yeah.
While some other ones tend to be more rebellious, or maybe you go through phases in life as well, right?
Yeah.
And do you think at this stage, I mean, you are in a position in your life where you found a balance?
Yeah, I really do, actually. It was challenging, but, like, especially through the pandemic. I was overseas when all of that happened. I was in Costa Rica, and so for a while I was quarantined in a foreign country, and it actually made me want to go home and put down some roots and have a place where I know I belong. Last time I left this island, I was wondering if I would ever find somewhere where I really feel like I belong, and now I have a home. This year actually was the first year that I lived in the same place for a whole year since I moved out of the house at 17 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm 38 now, so for 2 decades I was always like moving around, and now I live somewhere. I have a home that I love, full of plants, and I have a partner that I adore, and yeah, I feel like actually now on this trip, Phangan has really welcomed me back in some really beautiful ways. And now, instead of wondering if I will ever find a place that feels like home, now I'm like, oh, actually I have 2 places that feel like home. And I get to have both. So that feels really good.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's delve into belonging a little bit more. I mean, what is belonging to you? Because of course you can belong to a community, you can belong to a certain extent to a partner, to a family, but what is to you?
Belonging is when we really feel like a sense of peace, both within ourselves and like around us, like with our circumstances. I feel that when we really feel like we belong, there's this this ability to relax into the present moment and to feel held by life.
I think it's lovely, and I think it's a human need to belong to something or somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that we're all kind of searching for. And I actually think that the search for belonging is part of the fun of like being a human. It's part of what like makes it interesting. right? Like, I think if we always felt like we belonged everywhere all the time, it might be a little bit boring.
Yeah.
And so it's part of like the game of life to be like moving towards belonging.
Yes, and when I think of belonging, I think of identity as well. I mean, you identify yourself as part of a group or a community. Does it play in the picture? Because identity these days particularly is very challenging, let's say. What used to be, the conventional or traditional way of identify yourself is kind of being changed at the moment.
Yeah,
So
we're living in very exciting times in that way. Like, there's so much potential for who and what we want to be. That's just like quite open and I actually have like a little a card here. This is the back of my business card, and so these Fibonacci spirals kind of represent like the feminine, and the lines are like the masculine, and we belong here. Let's say, let's pretend that this is where we belong, in between the masculine and feminine, in between like life and death. We belong here, but often we find ourselves like out here somewhere for whatever reason, because our culture tells us that there's something wrong with us, or we're having conflict with our partner or whatever it is. And whenever we find that we are out here somewhere, there are 4 main ways to move back towards true belonging. And that is authenticity is one of them. Sometimes we pretend to be someone that we're not, so that we can like fake it and fit in. But that's not true belonging. That's the opposite, really. So one way we can move towards true belonging is through authenticity. Another way is through intimacy, because it is important that we have a felt sense of belonging in ourselves. But also, like, as humans, we're tribal animals. We need other people. And so intimacy is another way to move towards true belonging. Another way is through somatics, through our bodies. And this is how we come back to like belonging with ourselves. Sometimes when I feel like, I don't belong here and I don't know, sometimes even just coming back to my breath, stretching a little bit, like coming back to my body can be a way to come back to belonging. And the 4th way is through magic.
Wow.
Yeah. I think magic is actually very real. We were taught, that Santa Claus, when we were young, we loved Santa Claus or whatever, and then we learned he doesn't exist. And so we think, magic is a lie. But magic, I think, is very real in the sense that I think one of the main ways that we can practice magic is through shadow integration, which helps us to see that we are everything. We are part of like God, and then from that place, like so much is possible to us. And then also through things like ritual, and really stepping into these kind of ancient rituals that can lead us back into belonging again and again.
Yeah, because possibly another word for magic could be mysticism as well. Huh?
Or alchemy is
alchemy.
Also, like taking what is, and through the power of who we are, changing it a little and making it different. This is alchemy. This is magic.
That's wonderful. The way you explain is very good. I really understand it. And I like to ask you, so how do you help people with belonging, or?
Yes. Yeah. And I have found, so actually in my journey of trying to find where I belong, I had to reconcile the part of me that was like a good, sweet little Catholic girl with the part of me that like has quite a sex drive and really enjoys people and intimacy. And so there was like this good little Catholic girl, and then there was this like slut in me. And I had to try to figure out how to like be okay with both of them, and to integrate them. And so initially, a lot of my own searching for my own personal integration was around making peace with the part of myself that really enjoys sex, and so through that, I learned a lot about how to be in relationship, how to communicate, and also I really came back to myself. I've been doing a lot of feminine embodiment practices for a long time now, to help me come back to my womb space, to my pussy, and to come to a place where I'm really learning to listen to my body in ways that even when I thought I was like a sexually liberated woman, I wasn't really like deeply listening to the portal of my own pussy. I was like making a lot of decisions with my mind and moving from like fantasy and having fun, but I wasn't like really deeply listening. So I've been learning how to do that and how to communicate with the people I love. And so a lot of my work right now comes through as like sex and relationship coaching. So when you ask me what I do, I'm like, do I say I'm a priestess of intimate belonging, which kind of makes no sense, or do I say the more normal thing, which is like, right now at this phase in my life, I'm a sex and relationship coach often, and I do a lot of women's work as well. So a lot of my work right now is about, relationships and sexuality, which brings us to BlowJoy, I guess.
Yes, because I can say that this was a very creative way of reintroducing yourself into the island, because you run this workshop called BlowJoy to help ladies, sort of give good oral sex. Is that possible?
Well, it's the first goal is not about giving good oral sex. The main purpose of BlowJoy is to help women to enjoy it. It's not about the technique, it's not about doing a good job, it's about enjoying it. It's about coming back to like, what feels good for me? So instead of like being of service in our sexuality, it's more like, what do I want right now? What would feel good for me? And exploring from that place, because I think, unfortunately, lots of women, and men too, also it was open for men as well, for like men who would like to have a lingam in their mouth.
Okay.
So it wasn't just for women, but it's for anyone who wants to experience more pleasure in giving head.
Yeah.
And the idea is to take the job out of it, right? This blow job. To take this feeling that it's like a job, something that we like, either have to do, or maybe we want to do for our partners, but not necessarily something that we want to do because it sounds like fun for us. And I think that happens not just in blowjobs, but in sexuality in general. For men and women, a lot of us sometimes have some resistance to and a hard time like really receiving our own pleasure and taking our own pleasure. And it tends to be like an act of service, which is beautiful, and there's certainly like space for that in sexuality. But I wanted to help people to kind of like reclaim the pleasure that can be found in these things that we kind of tend to think of as like acts of service. I think especially for women, we learn to kind of disconnect from the wisdom of our bodies. Well, that's true for men too. I think so many things that we say are like, true for women, about how we sacrifice so much and we give so much. Like, I think a lot of that is really just as true for men as well. But I really wanted to take this like thing that can sometimes be a chore that we do out of like obligation and switch it back into something that we enjoy, because it makes it more pleasurable for everyone. And I think often humanity is caught in this like vicious cycle of like, we do things that we don't really want to do because we feel like we should, we feel like we have to, and then we don't like it, and then we kind of like resent it. We end up resenting the people that we do it for. We don't want to do it, so we kind of shut down, and then we don't do it, but then we feel like we should. So finally we like do it again, but we don't like it, and it becomes this like, ugh. And then we're all trapped in these lives that we really don't belong in. We feel separated from our bodies, separated from our partners, because we're doing all these things out of like this false sense of obligation.
Sure.
Instead of, like, the opposite of that is a virtuous cycle, right? Where we do things that we like, we do things that we enjoy, and it makes us want to do them more. And it makes us feel more connected to the people that we're doing it with, and more connected to ourselves, because we're tuning in to what feels good for us in this process. And so part of my work here is to take us from this like vicious cycle of moving further and further away from belonging, and to like stop and catch ourselves and move towards what feels good, move towards what lights us up, move towards connection that is authentic and embodied and like real and feels good in our systems, so that we want to do it even more, you know? And it just becomes like, yeah, a virtuous cycle of like pleasure and ease, because we've all been taught to like work so hard and sacrifice so much.
Yeah.
And like, why?
Yes, it goes back to the conversation earlier about society versus ourselves, right? But I love the idea that indeed we can maybe find a space of joy and of desire, which is more authentic and true, and then move towards it maybe initially with sexuality and belonging to a partner in a way or another, and then maybe in other aspects of life as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing about like consent, and is that we learn it's not just about sexuality, it's about how we move through the world, right? So I wanted to offer BlowJoy, and at first I thought, oh, this will be great. I was really wanting to offer it here on Phangan because it's it seems like a place that's like so liberated, you know, and like it's Tantra Island, and I thought, oh, this will be so much easier than like northern Michigan where I live at home, okay. Where, you know, like to even talk about, I also do a lot with coco-relating, conscious, organic, committed, open relationships.
I remember you have a Facebook group with that.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah, and I love hosting those meetings, and when I share about those at home, sometimes people get really upset even at just about the idea of being in an open relationship. Mm-hmm. Even though actually in coco-relating, what's most important about the openness is like open communication and being open with our authenticity and open to hearing the truth of our partners. Yeah. And then once all that is aligned, if it feels good, then maybe opening to intimacy with other people. But still, like back home, whenever I share that I'm hosting an event, I get lots of people who are like, oh, you know, but here on Phangan, everyone's a little more used to that. Yeah. And so I thought it would be easier. And so then when I announced BlowJoy, I knew it would make like a little bit of a, you know, I knew it would make some waves on the internet. I was expecting that, but I was actually quite surprised by how much it really triggered a lot of people who didn't understand the offering and didn't actually even seem interested in trying to understand. There was just this like, you know, you're gonna get deported, you should be ashamed of yourself, like.
What to do, you know? It's true. I think the way you introduced the whole concept, which again started with intimacy in a relationship, but then is much bigger in a way, right? And the way you did it in a creative, impactful, intimate, savvy way, I love the whole thing, to be honest with you, because I see the message, I see the content, and I see the package, and the whole thing is very cool, I think, you know. Yeah. That's why I was very happy, you know, to help you promote a little bit on my Facebook group, you know. And, you know, it's I'm glad that you did it, you know, because I think what characterizes our community is creativity and, you know, being a little bit different as well, you know. If that, you know, pushes some people buttons, that's part of it. And, you know, what you're doing, I think you're doing it from a good space, you know, and you know, that's great.
Yeah, I know that like my heart is in it, and like I really, wow, I might cry. I do it because I care so much, and because like I have experienced these like beautiful moments of intimacy and belonging that make all the suffering kind of worth it, you know, to have these moments where we really feel like, oh yeah. And I would really like to help more people to feel that way. And I know that everything I offer comes from this place of like really like a desire from my heart to help with like the suffering and the lack of belonging and like all the loneliness that comes with that. Like I see so much suffering in the world, and I really want to help to shift that. And I actually, so often, I wish that I could do that by being like a meditation teacher or a yoga instructor, because it seems like that would be so much easier in so many ways, you know? Like sometimes I'm like, why did I have to take on like sexuality? You know, it feels so big and so many people are so triggered by it. even people like, sometimes even especially in like the spiritual communities, I was finding actually even here on Phangan, everybody wants to talk about like the reunification of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And everybody wants that so badly. But we talk about it like it's something that will happen like up there.
Theoretically,
Yeah.
ideologically.
Right. The masculine and feminine will come together and it will be so beautiful. But the way that happens in this 3D reality is through sex.
Yes.
And like, whoa. That's where it gets much more complicated in many ways. But it's also where it becomes like a real part of our reality as well.
Yeah.
And so we can talk about it all day as something that might happen up there, out there, around us. Or we can do the really deep work of moving towards that ourselves. And like integrating our own masculine and feminine, and then being able to interact and engage in intimacy in ways that make that idea a reality in physical form.
Yeah.
And it can be really challenging, but it can also be like so exquisite and so lovely and so nurturing. Like sexuality has been so traumatizing for basically all of us. All of us, I think, maybe not all, but maybe 99% of the population has been traumatized by our sexuality in some way. Not just women, men as well, through, these cultures that we've grown up in that teach us that it's sinful and it's wrong unless it's like fits into this perfect little box, which, let's be real, most of us don't fit into those perfect little boxes. And the more that we can come back to our own bodies, the wisdom of our own bodies, and communicating our boundaries and our desires and our fears from a place where they can be held. Like, not all of our desires need to be fulfilled. Not all of our fears need to be alleviated. But just being allowed to like let them exist and to share them in a way where they're held and seen.
What you say really resonates. I think you speak it very well. I can see the value, of looking at the subject and discussing it, and then receiving advice around sexuality and intimacy and belonging. And I also believe that somehow, repression of sexuality, conditioning is embedded in culture, and this is thousands of years old. Yeah. If you think of the sort of practice of circumcision, for instance, or the way that, religious institutions were teaching children about masturbation, for instance, coming from a Catholic background, or how homosexuality was, still to these days, if you go to the Catholic Church, for instance. So there are so many blockages and constraints around sexuality, and to these days as well. And that's why maybe people reacted, some people at least reacted in such way to your workshop, because it was provocative in some ways, it was controversial, but it was also fun, and there is a need for people to come out and become intimacy and sexual coaches, and help people on that aspect. And because again, I also believe that once you start, then it doesn't stop. You start healing your sexuality, your intimacy problems, and then it's a virtuous cycle, as you called it earlier, right?
Yeah. I do feel I want to speak to this thing about, I think we do need lots more teachers in sexuality, but I also want to encourage people to really be very discerning if you go to a teacher in sexuality, and the way that you can know if it's someone who's acting from integrity is if they are always guiding you to your own truth, to the truth of your body, to the truth of your boundaries, and not telling you that this is how it should be.
Yeah.
What's going on for you in your body? How can I support you in your healing? Is a totally different thing than this is what's wrong with you and this is how we fix it, Anyone who's not teaching from a place of consent, and really aware of, actually the wheel of consent is a really incredible tool by a woman, it's developed by a woman named Betty Martin. anyone who doesn't have any like concept of how to talk about that in depth probably doesn't have any business teaching sexuality yet. It's really important that sexual education is coming from a place of self-discovery and the importance of coming back to like each person coming to what is true for them and not what someone else thinks is wrong with them and needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I think that is true, not just in sexuality, but in many different style of coaching, you know. As a nutritionist or nutritional therapist, I could just have one standard diet that I print out and I give to everybody. That would be very easy, you know what I mean? But that's not the way of doing it. You start from the current diet of the person, you know, you understand their beliefs, their specific needs, their body types, and then you start suggesting ways where the person can explore, you know, moving maybe towards more vegetables or towards, you know, different aspects of eating that are more awesome, balanced, etc.
Yeah.
So, you know, you cannot just impose your views on people because this is the dogma you learned at school and everybody has to do it the same way, you know. It's very unsophisticated, in my opinion, and indeed it's much better having a much more organic, awesome approach, like you say, you know.
Yeah, well, and there's like, what is there, something like 8 billion people on the planet, so there are 8 billion different ways to move through this world.
And making love.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I really believe actually that like we all have these ideas of what like is normal in sex and then what is like kinky and weird. And I have this theory that actually like for everyone who has like this strange kinky desire, there's someone else somewhere who would love to like be a part of making that come true. You know? Like we're all struggling under the weight of so much shame. And I just really want to be a part of like our liberation from that.
I think that's very worthy what you're saying, and cool, very nice. So I know that you're leaving very soon, and I hope that you'll be back very soon too. But the last question is the sweet question about Phangan, because of course Phangan is a place that you've been before, now you're coming back. What do you like about Phangan? Yeah.
Phangan is a place where I experience so much freedom and expansion, and it's a place that really like stretches me. Every time I come here, I leave a different person. Because it's a place of like transformation and incubation, and I experience a lot of inspiration here. I love how there's so many people from so many different places in the world. A lot of us maybe didn't really quite feel like we fit in at home, wherever home was, and there's a lot of seekers here, a lot of people who come here seeking healing, seeking liberation, seeking pleasure, and so it's this really interesting mix of people coming from all over the world and exploring. And I really love the way life feels quite synchronistic here. Sometimes I say that I have a desire for something and then I turn around and there it is, you know, or and just the people here I think are really amazing. The people and the nature, the water here. And all the birds and plants, and it's a really, really special place.
It's a beautiful place indeed. Yeah. And I know that you got lots of things going on in the US now. You're part of a band, like a girls band, is that right?
Yeah, Sisters of the Drum. We're a drumming band, an all-women's drumming band. We're creating an ecstatic dance journey through the 5 rhythms.
Wow.
I would really love to bring us all here someday, actually. That would be really amazing.
And your coaching is online as well, or in person?
Okay. I do a lot. I do a lot of coaching online. And then I also do in-person sessions. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Katie, thank you very much for coming so early in the morning for on the day you're leaving the island. So, but it's been a pleasure to see you again. So, kapun kap.
Yeah, kapun kap. Thank you.